Hey everyone. Today we're going to talk about the importance of sticking to core LLM features when you want to be able to switch between providers. So if you just want the flexibility to fall back to a different provider, if say OpenAI is out, you want to fall back to Anthropic, or if you want to just be able to jump onto new models when they appear. So for example, maybe you're using OpenAI, Anthropic comes out with a new model, you want to switch over to Anthropic, see how your application works. If you don't know me, I'm Dan. I'm an AI engineer. I've been working in software for just over 20 years now, and I've been focused on AI for over a year. All right, let's go ahead and jump right into it. The first thing that I want to talk about is how this came up. So this week, I was working on a project that uses streaming, response format, and tools with LiteLLM. The library focuses on providing 100 different providers conforming to the OpenAI interface. One interesting thing is we're using Anthropic for this and response format. Response format is an OpenAI feature. It's not an Anthropic feature. So when I started using streaming, response format, and tools, I started seeing something weird where the tool arguments were being converted to the message content. And that's part of the implementation issue. Response format actually gets pushed onto the tool calls that you send to Anthropic, and then LiteLLM switches that over to content. So you can already start to see they had to kind of hack things together to get this to work, and they ended up introducing a bug. And then the second piece that I fixed was that in the streaming case, if you're using response format, it'll say the finish reason is tool calls, but it should be stop because it's not actually populating a tool call, it is populating the message content. And that's the behavior that you would expect from OpenAI and Anthropic if you didn't have tools. And the other thing that I found is that this works differently when you're using non-streaming mode. So the second point here actually works just fine in non-streaming mode, unless there's more than one tool call. So if the LLM, for example, decides to call two tools at the same time, one of the tools and response format, then the response format result would actually get leaked through as a tool call when it's returned. And that's kind of bad too, because the caller wouldn't have actually known that response format tool was pushed to the LLM. It's an internal LiteLLM thing that is kind of leaking in the sync case if multiple tools get called, which is probably rare, so it's not really a big deal. But anyways, this is the real life thing that got me looking at LiteLLM and all the complications around trying to implement response format for a provider that doesn't actually natively support it. And now I want to get into the details, kind of show you what Anthropic and OpenAI actually support, and then a more reliable solution that doubles down on tools and gives you more consistent results across providers. All right, let's go ahead and dive into that. All right, here we are. This is an example that I put together that walks through OpenAI and Anthropic and LiteLLM. And as usual, there's a link to it in the YouTube description, so you can follow along with us if you want. We initially configure LangFuse, so if you run this on your own and you have a LangFuse account, you can see what all the traces look like. We're not actually going to go through the traces today. We don't have enough time. Let's get into the actual details. Okay, we're going to talk about tools and response format. This is the systematic difference between the two providers that I want to clarify in this video. So here's the tool that we're going to use. It's get current weather, and we're going to ask the LLM for a weather report where we could pass multiple cities and it will return a weather report. It's very similar to the LiteLLM tools example. That's what inspired it. All right, let's start with Anthropic. How does Anthropic work? So first, let's go through a basic tool call. We're setting up the get current weather tool call. We've gone over this before in other videos the name, the description, the arguments. And then we're passing the tools in, and we let the LLM choose which tool to call. And I'm just going to go ahead and run it over here so we can go over the answers as we walk through the code. So this is this first Anthropic tool call, and it decides to call the current weather. And so it returns the finished status as tool call, and that's it. We don't actually call the tool. We're not looping here. We're going to loop in the other examples, but this is really just, all right, here's how tools work in Anthropic. And the nice thing that we're going to see is that tools are very uniform across providers. There might be a little bit of mapping between different providers. So parameter names are slightly different. Parameter values are a little different, like tool choice is different, but the concepts are exactly the same. So there's pretty much a one-to-one mapping. So tool calls are like that. System messages are actually not consistent across even Anthropic and OpenAI. You can actually pass multiple system messages into the OpenAI chat completion API. What LiteLLM does under the hood is it'll group those system messages together and pass them in as a single system message, which I think is probably just fine. It's just a little bit surprising when you think about it. Anyways, here's the system message, here's the user request, and it calls the tool as expected. All right, now we're going to show what Anthropic does for JSON mode. So JSON mode is Anthropic's solution for structured output, and they actually didn't implement anything different. They just use tools. So you give it a tool name and you give it a schema. This schema is the JSON schema of the structured output. So they built on top of tools and decided they didn't need an additional feature. So in this case, we call it, we force the tool call. So when they talk about JSON mode, their example only has one tool. It forces the tool call. That's kind of why I think LiteLLM assumed they could assume it's only one tool call. Unfortunately, OpenAI allows you to send the format response, parameter, and tools at the same time. So it's not quite compatible with the OpenAI interface, which is what LiteLLM is trying to standardize. So forcing this conformity for OpenAI tools has started to cause an issue when the other providers don't actually implement it in the same way. So here's the structured output. And let's just see, we have our structured result. This one is not the weather example. It's actually looking for capital Japan. And it says confidence is 1. But you can see that the result is structured. There's no characters added on in the beginning and the end, which you'll often get if you don't use something like a tool call or structured output. All right, and then the final example that I have for Anthropic is tools plus JSON mode, which in this case is 2 tools. So now we're going to the weather example where we have get current weather tool, and then we have the structured output. In this example, we are using Pydantic models, so you don't need to write out the input schema. You can just say model JSON schema. That's the nice thing about Pydantic models and why you can usually just pass them in to any of these LLMs that natively support response format. They will just call this model JSON schema itself under the hood. All right, so here's this. We pass in the tools. We say tool choice is any. We actually are forcing a tool call here. You have to decide, or you can do multiple. It doesn't restrict from doing multiple, but it means you can't actually respond. It's similar to forcing the tool call for structured output above, but you can do it with multiple tools. And in this case, we can see that they decided to call get current weather first, which is what we'd expect. And then normally you would go through a loop here, and once it has enough context, it would use structured output. We're not going to follow that loop all the way in the Anthropic's example. We're going to actually show it in OpenAI, and then finally the LiteLLM example later. So that's an example of tool calls. It's an example of structured output and then mixing the two together. So these patterns work in Anthropic, but there isn't a structured output implementation built into their SDK like OpenAI. And that's what we're going to go through next. We're doing the whole agentic loop thing where we'll call tools until we get a stop response, and then we'll just return the structured output. So here's the Euro Weather Assistant, here's the user question, here are the tools. So this is the get current weather, and you can see the names are different, right? We have type function, then we have the function instead of the input schema and things like that. So it's same exact thing, but slightly different mapping that you have to deal with. But LiteLLM takes care of that for you, and there's no like hidden features in tools, so it actually works out well. LiteLLM doesn't have to hack that to get it to work. All right, so here we are using the response format, and we're passing the messages and the single tool. So that's what it looks like. And again, you can use tools and response format at the same time, which is the use case that confused LiteLLM. If we remember, LiteLLM was putting all of the tool calls onto the content, and that's because when you use response format, it doesn't return it as a tool, it returns it as the message content here. So when we get the finish reason stop, then we're done and we look at the message content and parse it. So that's fundamentally different than the way Anthropic does it, where it's an actual tool call. All the things are tool calls. So it would always go here, and then you would see that this would either be get current weather or the response format tool call, and then you'd exit when you see the response format tool call. You wouldn't do something like this, which we're going to see when we go through the LiteLLM example. So let's look at the agentic loop here, and you can see we go through step one. It gets 3 tool calls, so we look up San Francisco, Tokyo, and Paris, and then it responds. So we have finish reason tool calls, finish reason stop, and we're done. So here we're calling the tool and then adding the message and then looping, right? So this is the way that OpenAI works, and I think it's pretty clear how this won't work with Anthropic because they don't actually support the response format parameter. And hopefully it's clear now why LiteLLM is having problems implementing this, since if you pass multiple tools to the LLM, it can actually return 2 of them. You don't actually have control over whether or not it just returns one over the other. So that unexpected result is causing inconsistencies in the LiteLLM implementation. So they could either block tools in response format or hope for the best and maybe introduce a bug like they did. So since Anthropic does not support response format, the proposal is to actually always use tool calls. So OpenAI supports tool calls. What Anthropic is doing for structured output using tool calls is actually a valid solution. It will work with OpenAI as well. It fits the spec. So we're just going to double down on tool calls, not try to use the higher level response format thing since it has compatibility issues, and be guaranteed more consistent results across providers. And here we run it first with GPT and then Claude. So this is kind of what I talked about before, but now we're doing it with LiteLLM. We pass both tool calls. This is what we did with Anthropic. Tool choice is required. You can see this is the OpenAI tool choice because that's what LiteLLM implements. Slightly different than Anthropic. And then the difference here than the OpenAI loop is that, all right, we expect tool calls. And then if it's the get current weather, we do the same thing we did before for OpenAI. And as I said before, if it's weather report, we say, all right, we got the weather report, and we exit out of our agent loop and return the response to the user. So now I will just go through the LiteLLM examples, which nothing actually that interesting. Here we're just asking for San Francisco and Tokyo, so GPT does the same thing, and then it calls the report function as expected, and then it parses it properly again, great. And now we're going to do Anthropic, and you can see that it does the same thing, except Haiku actually splits the San Francisco and Tokyo query into 2 tool calls before returning the weather report. So that's it. That's the walkthrough. That's my sell on sticking to fundamentals. So I want to just talk a little bit about these compatibility layers where you're trying to kind of make these models conform to each other if the model doesn't support response format natively like OpenAI does, is causing a lot of complexity and inconsistent behavior. And it's not the only one. So reasoning is early. I think maybe the definitions will align. The main difference there, so Anthropic has a lot more variability. You can pass max tokens when you tell the model how much you want it to reason. With OpenAI, it's just a low, medium, high. So you have a lot more control with Anthropic. Luckily with LiteLLM, they allow you to pass those provider-specific variables. So if you switch, you still have to know the nuance between the providers, but it's a relatively straightforward switch. Or you can just use the OpenAI ones, and LiteLLM has hard-coded a mapping for you by hard-coding the max token value. Anyways, there's a bunch of different things that are different. It's a good idea to stick to the basics so you can easily switch between providers. So that's it for today. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. And if you want to work with me and Dave at App Vitals, then click the link in the description to schedule some time to chat with us. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks.